They called her crazy. A rusted-out locomotive, sitting silent for decades on a dead stretch of track, wasn't worth the price of the scrap metal. But when Jordan Hale, a young female mechanic with grease under her nails and a history she couldn't quite escape, rolled up with a flatbed and a dream, she wasn't buying junk, she was buying a chance. What she uncovered inside that forgotten engine would silence every critic and rewrite an entire chapter of local history. Before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from, and if stories like this ignite something in you, second chances, untold history, and heart over hype, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's episode takes things even further. The morning Jordan Hale signed the papers, the sky over Cumberland Station was heavy with summer heat and small-town judgment. The locomotive sat like a fossil at the far edge of the abandoned rail yard, half swallowed by weeds, sunburnt to a dull copper red, and leaning slightly on warped tracks that hadn't seen motion since the Carter administration. Most folks passing by thought it was nothing but scrap metal and moss. But Jordan saw something else. Something stubborn. Something proud. Something that still breathed, even if it was just in her own head. She'd first spotted it while passing through the outskirts of Millersfield, detouring from an auto salvage trip that took a little longer than expected. The train hadn't moved in decades, but it didn't feel dead. It felt paused. There was a nameplate barely clinging to its side. No, 802, Cumberland Bell. She took a photo with her phone, zoomed in on the lettering, and felt something tighten in her chest. Her grandfather used to tell her bedtime stories about that train. She thought he was making them up. The deal was simple. $1,000. As is. No guarantees, no parts list, no history. The seller, some retired municipal clerk, couldn't even remember how the county had ended up owning it. City surplus, he shrugged. Orphan metal. Jordan didn't care. She transferred the money, signed the deed, and had it hauled to a stretch of rail behind her dad's old service garage. That night, word spread fast. The girl who fixes rust buckets bought a train. A train. They laughed about it at the diner. What's she gonna do? Take it for a spin down Maine? One guy joked over meatloaf. Another said she should open a circus. Jordan heard it all. She always did. But she didn't care. She'd grown up in the shadow of jokes and sideways glances. What they didn't see was the way her hands shook when she first touched the steel, like it recognized her. The next morning she climbed up into the cab. The metal was cool, surprisingly clean beneath the grime. Vines had pushed through some floor seams, and a bird had nested above the pressure gauge cluster. But the levers, the dials, the heart of it all, they were still there, intact, waiting. Her boots echoed on the floor as she stepped carefully, reverently. There was something about the silence that didn't feel empty. It felt full of things unsaid. In the corner of the cabin, tucked behind a broken panel, she found it. A small canvas satchel, zippered shut and stiff with time. Inside was a conductor's journal, its leather binding cracked, the name etched in gold. E. H. Hale. Her breath caught. That was her grandfather's name. The pages were weathered but legible. Notes, schedules, drawings. A final entry dated the 3rd of November 1971. She's humming again. Not sure how much longer we'll run, but I swear she knows the way. Jordan sat down hard on the bench seat, journal open in her lap, heart pounding like pistons. This wasn't just a machine. This was something left behind, and maybe, just maybe, meant to be found again. Jordan didn't leave the cab for hours. Dust settled on her shoulders like old memories while she read every page of the journal, careful not to smudge the ink. Her grandfather's handwriting was neat, but firm. The kind of script you'd expect from a man who trusted his hands more than his voice. The entries started mundane engine logs, fuel consumption, mileage estimates, but by page 15 the tone began to shift. He wasn't just documenting a machine, he was talking to it. Bell's running hot again today. She gets restless when we sit too long. Heard the whistle this morning even before I turned the key. Thought I was dreaming. Strange marks near the firebox. Carved in deep. Don't remember seeing them before. Jordan turned the journal sideways, studying a rough sketch of the engine's underbelly. 3 small triangular symbols were drawn just beneath the boiler casing. They looked ancient. Deliberate. She blinked, squinting toward the front of the cab. Could something like that still be there? She climbed down from the cab and circled around the massive frame of the locomotive. It towered over her, rust clinging to every bolt, paint peeling like sunburnt skin. She ducked under the side, flashlight in hand, and scanned the metal just behind the firebox. Her heart caught in her throat. The symbols were still there. Carved by hand. No question, deep grooves in the steel, untouched by time or weather. 3 triangles arranged in a perfect arc. Exactly like the drawing. She reached out and brushed her gloved fingers across the etchings. The metal felt warmer than it should have. Not hot, just alive. She stepped back and looked at the whole engine again. There was something in the air. Not spiritual exactly, not supernatural, but sacred, in a way that made her breath feel heavier. Later that night, she returned to the garage and pulled out the only photo she had of her grandfather in his conductor's uniform. It was old, water-damaged, but his face was clear. Strong chin, steady gaze, a hint of a grin that hadn't quite finished forming. She placed it next to the journal and stared at both. She hadn't been close to him, he'd vanished, when her father was barely 10. The story went that he walked out one day for a rail job and never came back. Just disappeared. No trace, no wreck, no funeral. Her dad never talked about it, but now here he was, speaking to her through ink and steel. She could almost hear his voice in the margins. Don't let him scrap her. She's got stories to tell. That night, Jordan barely slept. She dreamed of steam clouds and lightning, of metal singing and rails that curved into nowhere. When she woke just before dawn, she didn't reach for coffee or check her phone. She grabbed the journal, tied back her hair, and headed straight for the yard. There were bones in that engine, and Jordan Hale was going to bring them back to life. By sunrise, Jordan was already crouched beside the locomotive's frame, peeling back layers of soot and rust with a wire brush. The triangles still shimmered faintly under her flashlight's beam, and now that she was looking closely, she noticed something else. Initials, barely visible, stamped just beneath the center symbol, E, H, H. Her pulse quickened. Edward Henry Hale. Her grandfather. The air was still and thick with humidity, the kind that made every breath feel earned, but Jordan barely noticed. She scraped deeper into the grime, every flake of paint like peeling away a secret. The more she uncovered, the more she began to see it. Her grandfather hadn't just worked on this engine. He had marked it, loved it, left pieces of himself inside it. She reached into her toolbox, pulled out a hand mirror, and slid it behind a cluster of old control rods to check for corrosion. That's when she spotted it, a small plate, bolted flush against the inner wall of the cab, hidden behind layers of piping. Not a manufacturer tag. A plaque, brass, custom made. With shaking hands, she unbolted the brackets and wiped the years away. Property of Edward H. Hale, for service beyond the schedule. It wasn't official rail company work. This was personal, homemade, engraved by hand. She sat back on her heels and let out a shaky breath. Why would he do that? And more importantly, what did he mean by service beyond the schedule? Later that day, she dug through the storage room at the garage, sifting through boxes of her dad's old things. Faded manuals, train whistles, a cigar box full of keys. It was in the bottom drawer of an old filing cabinet that she found it, a leather folder marked Hale Railway. Inside were hand-drawn track maps, some yellowed and curling, some carefully preserved in plastic sleeves. They didn't match anything she'd seen online. One of them showed a spur line that no longer existed, a track that forked from the main line and curved north into a forested area just outside of Millersfield. In the margin, a scribbled note, Bell Route. Classified the 2nd of November 2070. 1. Her throat went dry. That was the day before the last entry in her grandfather's journal. She stood in the middle of the storage room, heart pounding like hammer blows against steel. This wasn't just a forgotten locomotive. It was a message. And somehow, after all these years, it had waited for her to find it. That night, over a greasy burger and a cold root beer, she called the only person she could think of Wallace Dean, a retired rail yard technician who used to work with her grandfather in the 60 Seconds. He still lived in town. Still played poker at the VFW on Thursdays. "Wallace?" she said when he answered. "It's Jordan Hale. I think I found something that belonged to my grandfather, the Cumberland Bell." There was silence on the other end. Then, a slow, tired sigh. "I was wondering when someone in your family would go looking for that train," he said. Wallace Dean's house was like stepping into a time capsule. Faded train memorabilia lined the walls, brass lanterns, framed timetables, a mounted photo of a young Wallace in coveralls, smiling beneath a black conductor's cap. The smell of old paper and engine oil clung to the air like wallpaper. Jordan sat across from him at a cluttered kitchen table, her grandfather's journal laid open between them. He didn't speak at first, just traced a weathered finger along the final entry. His eyes, cloudy with age, didn't miss a single line. "I was on shift the night he disappeared," Wallace said at last. His voice was rough, low. "We were supposed to meet for coffee after his last run. He never showed." Jordan leaned forward. "The Bell, this engine. She was the last one he drove?" Wallace nodded slowly. "Wasn't supposed to be. He volunteered to take her out one more time. Said he had a job to finish, something off record." Jordan turned the journal toward him. "These markings under the firebox. You ever see them?" He squinted at the sketch, then at the photo Jordan had taken of the real symbols. His brow furrowed. "Yeah, I remember them showing up sometime in late 71. Nobody knew who carved them. But your grandfather got real quiet after that. Started talking about alternate routes, buried time. Thought he was just worn out. Long shifts can mess with a man's head." Jordan pulled out the hand-drawn map she'd found. "Did this line ever exist?" Wallace whistled low. "Damn near forgot about that. Spur line to a place called Glenbrae. It's not on any modern maps. There was a fire in the town hall. Whole area condemned. The tracks got pulled up years ago or buried." Jordan's mind raced. "You think he went there? That night?" "I think," Wallace said carefully. "Your grandfather found something he wasn't supposed to, and he used that train to move it somewhere no one would think to look." He stood up and walked over to a dusty cabinet, pulled out a heavy flashlight and a keyring. "Come on, you said the engine's in your yard now?" Jordan nodded. "I hauled it in last week. Then let's go see what secrets the old Bell is still hiding." By nightfall, the two of them stood in the shadow of the Cumberland Bell, Wallace's flashlight sweeping across her riveted steel hide like a searchlight. He moved with a limp, but still had the instinct of a man who'd spent his life around machines. He tapped along the underside of the firebox, listening, feeling. "Here," he said. "This panel shouldn't be here. It's custom." They pried at the seam with a crowbar until it groaned open. Dust and soot poured out, followed by the dull thud of something wrapped in canvas landing at their feet. Jordan picked it up, heart racing. It was a satchel, heavy, still sealed with leather straps. She unbuckled it slowly and peeled back the flap. Inside was a small metal box, a bundle of sealed envelopes, and an object wrapped in oilcloth. She unwrapped the last item with trembling fingers. It was a pocket watch, her grandfather's initials etched on the inside cover, and still ticking. The watch ticked steady in Jordan's palm, defying all logic. It had no right to still be running, not after 5 decades sealed inside a boiler compartment. And yet, as the minute hand crept forward, it felt like time wasn't just passing, it was resuming. Wallace stared at it like it might explode. "Last I saw that watch," he whispered, "your grandfather was showing it off to the yard boss. Said it had been passed down for 3 generations. Jordan held it to her ear, listening to the faint, mechanical heartbeat. Why hide it? Why hide any of this? Wallace opened one of the envelopes. Inside was a yellowed newspaper clipping from 1967. The headline read, Glenbrae Rail. Expansion halted, dispute over land rights and safety claims. He rubbed his jaw. Glenbrae was supposed to be a connector town. Small place, but it sat right on the edge of a mining reserve. The railway company wanted to build through it, make it a hub. But the town fought back, said it was too dangerous. Tunnels weren't stable. There were rumors of cave-ins. Then one day, fire breaks out in the town records office. A week later, everyone's gone. Gone how? Jordan asked. Evacuated, relocated, or just vanished. Depends who you ask. They dug deeper into the satchel, unfolding each envelope like a secret waiting to exhale. More documents, faded blueprints of a rail spur ending near a town square. Letters between engineers talking about unauthorized freight runs and company directives outside standard ops. Some were signed with the initials EHH. Jordan's hands trembled as she read one in particular. It was dated the 30th of October 1971, 3 days before his final journal entry. To whoever finds this, if the bell makes it back, then you've got work to do. What we moved, it wasn't on any manifest, but it matters. Keep her safe. If they know she's still out there, they'll come for her, and you. So stay quiet, stay moving, and trust the rails. They remember. E.H. Hale. Wallace let out a slow breath. Your grandfather wasn't just running trains. He was running something else. Off, books, hidden. Jordan nodded slowly, the weight of it settling like iron in her chest. Then I have to find out what it was. Whatever he died protecting, it didn't stay buried. Not completely. Wallace tapped the map again. That spur line to Glenbrae, most of the tracks are gone, but there's one stretch that still cuts through the forest. Could be walkable. If anything's left out there, it'll be at the end of that line. Jordan stood, brushing off her jeans, eyes locked on the fading light in the west. The bell loomed behind her, silent but waiting. I'm going, she said. Wallace tilted his head. Alone? She glanced back at the locomotive, her jaw set. Not exactly. I've got a train full of questions, and I think it still remembers the way. Restoring a rusted-out steam engine was never part of Jordan's life plan. She could rebuild a carburetor in her sleep, rewire an alternator one-handed, and weld sheet metal with her eyes half closed, but a 200-ton locomotive built before color television? That was something else entirely. Still, as the morning sun spilled over the yard and glinted off the rounded face of the Cumberland Belle, she didn't feel intimidated. She felt chosen. She pulled her hair into a knot, zipped her coveralls, and got to work. First came the cleaning, scraping off rust, decades of soot, and nests of stubborn ivy that had woven themselves through every bolt and joint. Then the assessment, boiler integrity, wheel alignment, cabin hydraulics. Most of it was shot. Some of it could be salvaged. All of it was worth the effort. Within days, word started to spread. Not the mocking kind this time. People passed by slowly, staring. Some even stopped to watch her work. Wallace showed up every afternoon like clockwork, offering tools, advice, and quiet encouragement. Belle's not done yet, he'd mutter. She's just waiting on her next chapter. And then others started to come. First was Arturo, a retired freight mechanic who once ran yard checks for Union Pacific. He rolled up in a truck full of scrap parts and simply said, "Heard you reviving an old lady. Couldn't stay away." He brought fittings, clamps, even a water pump that was close enough. Next was Reese, a local college student studying industrial design. "I saw the photos online," she said, sheepish but eager. "I've never worked on a train before, but I learned fast." Jordan handed her a wire brush and grinned. Then welcome to Belle's crew. By the end of the week, there were 5 of them working in shifts. A makeshift restoration team drawn together not by money or fame, but something else. Curiosity. grit, maybe even belief, and the bell responded. Once the cab was cleared, they got the old gauges calibrated. Reese 3D printed replacements for the broken ones, while Arturo hand-fabricated missing pipes in his garage. Wallace managed to find an old service manual buried in his attic, grease-stained and fragile but intact. Piece by piece, Jordan could feel the engine waking up beneath her hands. Every groan of metal, every hiss of steam lines being pressure-tested, sounded like breath. In quiet moments, she read the journal again, over and over. Her grandfather's words weren't just notes, they were instructions, warnings, even encouragement. One night, as she lay under the chassis, tightening a rusted bracket, Wallace crouched beside her. "You know," he said, "people thought your grandfather went crazy before he vanished. Talking to the train, scribbling symbols in the dark. But I don't think he lost his mind. I think he knew something nobody else did." Jordan slid out and looked up at him. "Like what?" Wallace glanced toward the trees, then back at the locomotive. That this engine wasn't just hauling freight, it was carrying truth. Jordan wiped the grease from her hands, staring at the bell as moonlight silvered across its curves. "Then it's time we found out what that truth was. Because soon, the bell wouldn't just be whole again, she'd be moving." The tracks that once led to Glenbrae had all but vanished, swallowed by decades of forest growth and erosion. But Jordan had the map, and the bell had momentum. After 3 weeks of non-stop restoration, the Cumberland Bell groaned back to life with a slow exhale of steam that smelled like ghosts and grit. The drive wheels turned. The whistle, rebuilt from salvaged parts, let out a long, mournful note that echoed through the valley like a call to the past. It wasn't smooth, it wasn't fast, but it was real. Jordan stood at the throttle, hands trembling. Reese manned the boiler feed. Arturo rode shotgun with a wrench tucked behind his ear. And Wallace sat at the rear, watching the trees roll by with a look of quiet awe. The bell crawled forward, inch by inch, following the old spur line north, toward whatever her grandfather had hidden. They cleared the first half-mile with no issue. Jordan had walked the stretch the week before, clearing debris, respiking loose rails, and flagging danger zones. But past the overgrown water tower, the one from the journal sketch, the trees thickened, and the ground turned soft with moss and pine needles. The bell didn't care. She pushed forward, wheels grinding softly, smoke curling into the canopy like incense. It felt like cutting through time. They passed a rusted rail sign that simply read, "Glenbrae, 2.3 miles. Jordan's throat tightened. Wallace leaned out the side, pointing. "That switch up ahead, it still works. God almighty." The spur curved, just as the map had shown, around a bend and into a ravine where the trees suddenly parted. And there, beneath the wild growth and fallen timber, they saw its stone foundations, shattered brick walls, the remains of a depot platform, overtaken by vines and time. Glenbrae, or what was left of it. They stopped the engine on a stretch of intact rail. Jordan climbed down, boots crunching against broken glass and earth. The silence here wasn't just quiet, it was sealed. No birdsong, no breeze. Just the deep hush of something that had been forgotten on purpose. The station had burned, clearly. Scorch marks blackened the remaining beams. But Jordan spotted a hatch, half buried under ivy, beside the base of what looked like a collapsed ticket booth. She knelt, brushing back decades of soil and debris, revealing a steel trapdoor stamped with 3 triangles, the same markings carved beneath the bell's boiler. Her heart began to race. "This is it," she whispered. "This is where he came." Arturo helped her pry it open. The hinges groaned but gave way. A rush of cold air spilled out, smelling of damp stone and rusted memory. A stairwell led downward, into the earth, lit only by the beam of Jordan's flashlight. Wallace stayed topside to monitor the bell, while Jordan, Reese, and Arturo descended slowly into the darkness, their boots echoing against the narrow concrete steps. At the bottom, they found a door. heavy, sealed with a chain and a tag that read, "Property of Cumberland Rail, Restricted Archives." Jordan stared at the lock, then pulled her grandfather's journal from her satchel. On the last page, scribbled hastily in pencil, was a code, 4719. For Belle. She'll find her way. She entered the combination into the lock. It clicked. The door creaked open. Inside was not what they expected. Not gold, not weapons, but documents. Hundreds of them. Files, blueprints, ledgers, testimonies, all stamped confidential. Jordan stepped inside, the Belle's whistle fading behind her, and then she saw a file with her grandfather's name on it. She reached for it with a shaking hand. The truth was waiting. Jordan stood frozen, the folder in her hand heavier than any wrench she'd ever lifted. Across the cover, stamped in black ink, Hale, Edward Incident, Report 1971. Below that, 2 words that sent a chill down her spine. Internal breach. She opened it slowly. Inside were typewritten pages, brittle and yellowing at the corners. The first was a memorandum from the Cumberland Rail Authority, dated November 4th, 1971, the day after her grandfather's last journal entry. Conductor Hale reported unauthorized access to cargo manifests during unscheduled run through Glenbrae Spur. Flagged shipment as high risk. Refused to comply with delivery order. Asset marked as non-compliant. Recommended for removal. Jordan blinked. Removal? Reese leaned over her shoulder, reading silently. They didn't fire him. They buried him. Further into the file were manifest copies, lines of coded cargo descriptions. One stood out. Unit 47C. Divided by experimental material. Divided by property of concordance. Mineral group. Divided by do not inventory. Arturo furrowed his brow. That's not freight. That's classified transport. Whatever he was hauling, it wasn't steel or lumber. Jordan flipped to the last page. A hand-scrawled note from her grandfather. Different handwriting. Different tone. I saw it. Whatever they buried here, it isn't safe. It wasn't meant to be moved. That's why they erased Glenbrae, not because of a fire, but because of what was underneath. At the back of the room, another door stood ajar. Reese pushed it open with the butt of her flashlight. The light cut across the space like a blade, revealing a massive underground vault, concrete walls, steel support beams, and a rusted freight cart sitting dead center on a short stretch of track. Jordan stepped inside, the air cold and humming with something unspoken. The cart was locked tight. But beside it, bolted to the wall, was a terminal ancient, covered in dust. She wiped the screen and stared. An input prompt glowed faintly. Enter access code. To initiate file dump. She hesitated. Then typed the only code that had mattered so far. 4719. The screen flickered. A whirring sound kicked up inside the wall. And then, like the breath of a ghost, the monitor came to life with schematics, logs, transmission records, and names. Lots of names. Most were crossed out. One wasn't. E.H. Hale. Designated as Whistle Route Escort. Arturo stepped closer. This wasn't just cargo. This was a cover operation. Your grandfather didn't just get in the way. He sabotaged it. Jordan's throat tightened. He tried to stop it. Tried to hide it. That's why he vanished. A deep rumble echoed through the floor. Jordan froze. Did you feel that? Reese nodded slowly. Something shifted. Down below. They followed the vibrations to the far end of the vault, where a collapsed stairwell led deeper into the bedrock. At the base was another trap door, this one marked in red. Danger. Sealed core do not disturb. Jordan didn't touch it. Not yet. But her hands trembled. Above ground, the sun was dipping low. The Bells still waited on the tracks quiet, watching. They left the vault in silence, the file clutched tightly in Jordan's hand. That night, she sat alone in the engine's cab, staring out at the dying light. She finally understood why her grandfather had risked everything, why he left that journal behind, why he carved those symbols into the bell's frame. It wasn't just to remember where to go. It was to warn whoever came next. And now that person was her. The morning after opening the vault, Jordan didn't speak to anyone. Not Reese, not Arturo, not Wallace, who had returned to find the bell cold and her crew shaken. She spent the early hours alone in the cab, journal in one hand, coffee in the other, listening to the tick of her grandfather's watch and the occasional creak of steel settling in the Sunday. There were too many questions and no simple answers. What exactly had the rail company tried to transport through Glenbrae? What was under that final hatch in the vault? Why had they gone to such lengths to erase the entire town? She didn't know, but she knew enough. Enough to be sure they'd covered up something dangerous, something her grandfather had tried to stop. She looked around the cab. The Cumberland Bell was more than restored now. She was awake. The controls were responsive. The engine purred low when idling. She wasn't just a machine, she was a messenger. And Jordan had become the next rider in a legacy most people never knew existed. Word of what they found in Glenbrae had started to spread. Quietly, at first. Wallace mentioned it to an old colleague, who'd apparently been dismissed from the company in the 80 seconds for poking around. Arturo leaked one of the freight logs to a local archivist, and within 24 hours, a journalist showed up asking for comment. Jordan turned them all away. Not yet. This wasn't a headline. It was a reckoning. That afternoon, she called a town meeting. Not at City Hall, but at the rail yard, right in front of the bell. Locals showed up in folding chairs, confused but curious. Mechanics, teachers, retired railmen, high schoolers, even a few former skeptics who'd once laughed at the girl playing conductor. Jordan stood in front of them all, smudged with soot, her hands greasy, her voice steady. She didn't share every detail. Not the hatch, not the deeper levels of the vault. But she told them enough. About the journal, the hidden maps, the sealed archives, and her grandfather's final ride. She spoke about the whistle stop that had become a grave, about Glenbrae, a real place, a town that didn't vanish by accident, but was buried to protect secrets someone powerful didn't want uncovered. When she finished, there was silence, and then slow applause. Wallace stepped up beside her and laid a hand on her shoulder. Your grandfather would be proud, not because you found the truth, but because you carried it forward. Later that night, Jordan returned to the bell and placed the pocket watch on the dash. Then she sat in the driver's seat and started her checklist. Boiler pressure, throttle sensitivity, whistle clear. Arturo approached the cab with a radio in hand. You sure about this? Jordan nodded. We opened the vault. That train of thought doesn't stop now. She tugged the throttle gently. The bell exhaled. Steam hissed from the pistons. Behind her, the yard lights glowed like stage lamps. This was no longer restoration. It was a return. And Jordan Hale was ready for the final mile. The Cumberland Bell rolled out just past midnight. Not fast, not flashy. Just steady the way steel remembers how to move. Jordan sat at the helm, gloves worn, eyes sharp. Her grandfather's watch clipped to the dash and the faded journal open beside her. The whistle cut through the night, like a memory finding its voice. She wasn't just driving a train. She was delivering a story, a warning, a legacy. The crew rode with her, Arturo monitoring the gauges, Reese keeping logs, Wallace in the rear tender, flashlight in hand like he was guarding something sacred. The route was simple. Retrace the spur to Glenbrae one last time. Open the vault, seal it permanently, archive what needed to be preserved, and bury what never should have been unearthed. But first, Jordan had one final stop to make. They slowed near a clearing where Glenbrae's main street once stood, or what was left of it. The stone foundations were overgrown, the depot ruins cast in moonlight. Jordan stepped down from the cab, boots crunching soft earth, and crossed the lot to a narrow rise where wildflowers grew in strange abundance. The journal had mentioned this place once. The hill past the switch track where the sun used to hit just right. She knelt there, unwrapped a small tin from her satchel, and poured the contents into the soil. Ashes, her grandfather's. Recovered from her father's attic in a forgotten urn labeled yard sample. But now she knew better. It wasn't a sample. It was a promise, a pause, waiting to be fulfilled. The wind shifted gently, as if acknowledging her. Back at the vault, the team worked quickly. Reese transferred digital copies of the documents onto an encrypted drive. Arturo resealed the lower hatch with reinforced steel. Wallace posted a sign on the outer door. Railway Archive, closed by order of conscience. And then, they left. No grand announcements, no press. Just a final log entry in the back of the journal penned in Jordan's hand. Bell made her run. Truth returned, legacy honored. To those who find this, remember, steel carries more than freight. It carries who we were and who we dared to become. 2 weeks later, the Bell was parked at the edge of Jordan's garage lot, restored and gleaming, not as a curiosity, but as a monument. School kids came to see her. Veterans touched the rails. Mechanics ran fingers along her rivets like prayer beads. And Jordan, she kept working. She tuned engines, taught Reese how to rebuild brake lines, and helped Wallace digitize the old maps. She also started something new, a community archive, not just for rail history, but for forgotten places and people. Stories erased by time, now collected and honored. She named it the Whistle Stop Project, in memory of all the last stops that weren't supposed to be final. And every now and then, at dusk, Jordan would climb into the Bell's cab, turn the watch over in her palm, and sit, quietly. Not out of grief, but because she knew now the journey wasn't about finding treasure, or secrets, or even answers. It was about finishing what someone else started, and making sure the tracks didn't end with you. In the town that once mocked her, the woman who bought a rusted locomotive had become something else. Not just a mechanic, a messenger, a keeper of rails, a builder of legacy.